Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your sources, the ones you share with us, and really unpack the most important ideas.
Yep, our mission is basically to help you cut through all the noise.
Get straight to the key insights, and maybe find a few, surprising things along the way.
And today, we are definitely diving deep. We're looking at this essay, and it has a pretty fascinating perspective.
Okay.
Well, it's the idea that humanity's development, our journey, might not be this straight line upwards,
Go
but
ahead.
maybe more like a grand cycle, civilizations rising, falling. But, and here's the twist, our collective intelligence potentially peaking higher each time around.
Wow, okay. That's a big idea, a cyclical view.
Right, and the source actually links this to some pretty ancient beliefs.
Yeah.
Specifically about Earth's position in the precession of the equinox.
I've heard of that, the idea that getting closer to some kind of universal center, like a high energy zone, could trigger awakenings.
Exactly, that's the connection the source makes, and it suggests that based on this framework, we might be on an upswing right now.
Interesting. So whether you buy into the specific cosmology or not,
Yeah, regardless of the mythology.
the core argument is that the source believes something really significant is happening, like right now.
Yes, it's arguing our collective consciousness is expanding, we're becoming more self-aware, questioning things more.
Trying to build lives based on, what, values instead of just obligation.
Precisely. Less about just doing what's expected, more about what feels authentic.
So if that's happening, you'd expect to see signs, right? Like actual changes in everyday life.
That's the logical next step. What does this look like on the ground? How would we even notice it?
And that's exactly what we're going to do in this deep dive. We want to explore the specific everyday effects the source points to.
The signs it identifies as evidence for this potential shift.
Yeah. And think about what they might mean for you listening right now.
Okay, so let's start unpacking these observations. The source actually lists 16 distinct signs it sees emerging. We can kind of group them.
Makes sense. Where should we start?
Let's begin with the shifts the source sees happening within individuals on a personal level.
All right. What's the first one?
Well, it highlights what feels like a really fundamental change. This growing recognition of individual power.
Meaning
Things like self-empowerment, individuality, autonomy. They're not just seen as nice-to-haves anymore. The source suggests they're becoming fundamental to, a fulfilling life.
Okay, that resonates. And I guess that connects to the next point.
It seems to. This focus on the individual really seems to fuel what the source points out next. This huge surge in tools for self-understanding, especially over, say, the last 15 years.
Like positive psychology, emotional intelligence stuff.
Exactly. And personality frameworks, too. The source mentions the Big Five, Myers-Briggs,
Yeah.
even things like astrology and enneagrams.
Right, those are everywhere now.
And the source sees this not just as a fad, but as a kind of collective hunger for self-awareness. Like we're all trying to figure ourselves out on a deeper level.
Makes sense. It feels like people are asking those questions more.
And it's not just thinking about it either. It's also about practice. The source points to things like yoga and meditation.
Which used to be seen as pretty, well, fringe in the West, right?
Definitely. But now, they're mainstream. Yoga studios, meditation apps, they're common.
And the science is catching up too, isn't it?
Yeah.
The source mentions research showing meditation can actually physically change the brain.
Yeah, that's a key point. It's moving from being seen as alternative
Yeah.
to something with, scientific backing.
So more self-awareness, more tools, more practices. What else on the personal level?
Well, building on that internal focus, the source also observes a general increase in qualities like intuition, empathy.
Curiosity, being more informed.
Yes, all of those. And also a noticeable rise in tolerance towards differences between people. It suggests these are becoming more common traits.
That's hopeful. Maybe understanding ourselves helps us understand others.
That could be the connection, yeah. And one final point on this personal level, which feels quite significant. The source identifies this trend of people actively confronting, dealing with long suppressed emotions, really digging into that stuff.
You mean like trauma work, healing past wounds?
That kind of thing, yes. It suggests many people have gone through or are going through these intense, sometimes really radical personal changes, dealing with old baggage.
And the source calls this?
It describes it as an awakening to something deeper, not just therapy, but something more profound, directly linking it back to that core idea of consciousness shifting.
Okay, that covers the personal angle. Let's pivot now. How does the source see this shift playing out with information and maybe our collective understanding?
Right, this is where the scale gets much bigger. The source argues that just basic common knowledge is expanding faster than ever before.
And the internet is the main driver there, presumably.
Absolutely. It points out we can now research virtually anything. We're consuming articles, ideas, complex information at speeds that were just impossible before.
It really has changed how we learn, hasn't it? The speed and the access.
Fundamentally. And it's not just consuming information, it's also about voices.
Right. Everyone can have a platform now. Social media, blogs, podcasts.
Exactly. Unlike the past, where just a few gatekeepers controlled the messages, now pretty much anyone can contribute to the conversation.
Which can be messy, obviously.
Oh, definitely messy. But the source sees this as crucial. It gives us a kind of mirror, showing us where we are collectively, warts and all.
A real-time snapshot of the global psyche, almost.
Sort of, yeah. And this explosion of information and voices seems directly linked to the next point the source makes.
Which is?
A widespread trend of questioning the system, people learning to think more for themselves.
So more skepticism towards big institutions.
Yeah.
Government, media, education.
Yeah, that's the idea. Increased skepticism, more theorizing about how things really work, rather than just accepting the official story as the whole truth.
Well, when you have access to so many different perspectives.
It's almost inevitable, isn't it? You start looking at the established ways with a more critical eye. Okay, so we've talked individuals, we've talked information. The source also sees big shifts in relationships and broader societal norms.
This is just very relevant to everyday life. What's changing here?
Well, a really clear one is a move away from relationships based purely on obligation. Towards relationships. Shared values.
So expectations around things like marriage, parenting, they're evolving.
Definitely. The emphasis is shifting. Finding truly compatible partners, being more deliberate about having kids or choosing not to.
And more acceptance of different family structures, too, like happy non-nuclear families.
Exactly. Prioritizing happiness and connection over just sticking to the old script. It's a pretty fundamental reshaping of partnership and family.
Yeah, that feels true. What else in this area?
Well, connected to this openness is how we talk about difficult issues, things that used to be taboo.
Like mental health. The source mentioned depression.
Yes, depression, sexual abuse, topics that were kept hidden. The source notes that bringing these out into the open is slowly, maybe painfully slowly, but surely, removing shame and stigma.
Just talking about it helps people relate, understand, maybe heal.
That seems to be the idea. Fostering understanding on a wider scale. Think about how hard those conversations were even, 20 or 30 years ago.
True. The shift is noticeable. What about work? That's a big part of society.
Huge. And the source definitely picks up on widespread dissatisfaction with the traditional employment model.
The 9-to-5 grind.
Pretty much. It talks about this feeling of having just about had it, realizing that, working ourselves to death does not make for a good life.
But people still need to earn a living, right?
Mm-hmm.
The source acknowledges that.
Oh, yeah. It highlights the tension, feeling essentially enslaved to capitalism for our survival, as it puts it, but at the same time.
We're talking more about work-life balance, part-time options, freelancing.
Exactly. Those conversations are much more mainstream now, more accepted. It's like this collective wrestling match between needing to survive and wanting a more balanced, meaningful life.
Interesting. What else on societal norms?
The source brings up something it calls the deliberate oppression of feminine energy in society.
Okay, what does that mean in this context? Is it just about women?
It doesn't seem to define it just in a gendered way, though that's obviously related. It implies society has undervalued certain qualities often associated with the feminine.
Like intuition, collaboration,
nurturing,
emotional intelligence, maybe.
Perhaps things like that. And the source argues that restoring balance, integrating these qualities more fully into society is crucial for our collective health. It's looking at deeper cultural dynamics.
Got it. That connects to another point, maybe.
Yeah.
About gender itself.
It does.
Oh.
Building on that, the source notes a really significant trend towards breaking down the rigid gender binary.
Moving beyond just male-female based on appearance.
Yes. A move away from defining yourself solely by external factors, and much more acceptance around discovering and identifying as who you genuinely feel you are internally, regardless of sex assigned at birth.
That's a fundamental challenge to very long-held norms.
Absolutely. And kind of tying a lot of these relationship and societal shifts together, Social justice.
It's definitely front and center in public discussion now.
Right. The source points out how these issues are making headlines constantly, and it offers a pretty sharp definition of ignorance here.
Which is?
It says ignorance in this context is not considering all beings equal.
Wow.
And it argues that technology actually plays a key role here by giving voice to marginalized groups, exposing injustice.
It helps shift those social norms towards equality, towards liberation from oppressive structures.
That's the argument. Technology as a catalyst for pushing towards greater equality and acceptance.
Okay, just a couple more points from the source, focusing now on health and the environment.
All right. What's the health angle? It notes a really big increase in interest in organic foods and also homeopathic or alternative remedies.
Why does it think that's happening?
The source mostly attributes it to growing concern about chemicals in industrial food production, GMOs, antibiotics, pesticides, all that stuff.
So it's a kind of skepticism about the conventional food system, a desire for more natural approaches.
Seems like it, being more conscious about what we put in our bodies and the potential impacts.
Makes sense. And the final point, the environment.
Yes. The last one it mentions is this increasing collective concern about our impact. Humanity's effect on the natural climate.
Climate change awareness, basically.
Yes, but maybe deeper than just awareness. The source describes it as a shift away from seeing the Earth as just a resource, just a thing to be used.
Towards seeing it differently.
Towards treating it more like an actual living entity.
Ah, okay. So a fundamental change in our relationship with the planet itself.
Potentially, yeah. Moving away from pure dominion towards something maybe more like stewardship, or recognizing we're part of a living system.
Wow. Okay, so when you pull all of that together, all these observations the source makes.
Yeah, the intense focus on self-understanding, the shifts in information, questioning systems, changing relationships, different views on health, the planet.
The source is basically saying these aren't just random, isolated trends.
Exactly. It's positing that these could be the everyday, observable signs, evidence maybe of a much larger collective shift in consciousness happening right now.
And it ties this back to that cyclical idea you mentioned at the start, the ancient beliefs.
Right. It frames this potential shift as maybe being part of that grander pattern of human awakening, suggesting we're currently on the upswing of one of these cycles.
Which leaves us with a pretty big thought to chew on.
A very provocative thought, yeah. This source basically implies, well, if this premise is correct,
if consciousness and intelligence do peak higher each cycle,
and if we are on an upswing towards a new level of awakening,
then what does that even look like? What's the ultimate potential of human consciousness from this perspective?
It's a profound question, isn't it? It pushes you to think about the endpoint. If we're really on this trajectory the source believes we're on, what does a higher state of collective being actually entail?
That's the lingering thought from the source, really.
Yeah.
Something for you, the listener, to mull over. Considering the cumulative impact of all these everyday shifts we've just unpacked,